All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Eco Summit 2020. I'm going to do some introductions here, and while I do that, you can see the Eco Summit 2020 banner up on your screen. I'm going to add our camera feeds, so you'll at least be able to see the three of us. So if my co-host would get ready to smile for the camera, everyone's going to be looking at you in just a second here. All right, there we go.
Hello.
Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Hello. All right, so we'll officially kick things off right now. Do some introductions. First, I would really like to welcome you to day 3 of our first ever Eco Summit. It's brought to you by the Care for Creation Ministry from St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Triangle, Virginia. I recognize plenty of names in the chat from previous nights, so welcome back to all of you. But if you are joining us for the first time, we want you to know that this summit it's very important to our ministry. Prior to the pandemic reaching our shores, we were planning on having a big one-day event at the parish, but obviously that's not possible under the current circumstances. So we did a quick pivot and created this online summit that you're watching tonight. This week-long series of webinars was created as a way for us to celebrate both the 50th anniversary of Earth Day and the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. I'm Brandon Jubar, the Director of Youth Ministry at St. Francis, and I'll be your host for this evening's webinar. It is called Stop Doom and Gloom with Blooms, How to Grow Your Own Pollinator Garden. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I thought this was interesting. They say that pollinators are the engines that run healthy habitats. And whether you have a few feet on a balcony or a large backyard in the country or anything in between, you can help. And tonight we'll talk about how to plan, build, and grow your own garden that will ensure the future is filled with butterflies and pollinators and unicorns and rainbows. We will have time for questions and answers after the presentation, but we encourage you to feel free to submit questions during the presentation. Now, if you put them in the chat, the chat is kind of for chat. We'll watch and try to catch those, but we want to point out that at the bottom of your screen, underneath your webinar, there should be a place for you to actually enter a question, not a chat, but a question. And if you ask those questions, that makes it easier for us to monitor. And as we answer them, we're able to mark them off and keep track of them better. So if you can help us out there, it'll keep us from losing track of things. But if you can't find the question box and you want to put it in the chat, we will work through it. We're all in this together. My co-host this evening is Scott Dean. Once again, welcome, Scott.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's good to see everybody out there.
Scott is a life science teacher for Prince William County Schools, where he runs a green club for middle school students. And as I say every night, bless his heart, middle school students, say that again, middle school students. And he's a member of the Prince William County Schools sustainability team. Scott has been teaching in Virginia for 26 years. Outside of school, he's a member of the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C., and he co-chairs the St. Francis Care for Creation Committee. That's the team who brought this Eco Summit together. So Scott will be helping me monitor the chat as well as dealing with the questions that you submit. And last, but certainly not least, I am pleased to introduce our presenter this evening, Susan Schunk. As a professional horticulturist, easy for me to say, horticulturist, she's got the knowledge to help you choose the right plants for the right place, plus the resources and creativity to help you attain your perfect landscape. Now, she actually did own and operate her own landscape design and installation business for over a decade. She's earned her Bachelor of Science in Horticulture from Clemson University. Go Tigers. Susan is a certified plant professional and a certified environmental educator with experience in everything from development of plants in a greenhouse to working with the Tom Fazio designed golf course, the Sneed. If you've ever been to Greenbrier Sporting Club in West Virginia, I think that's where the Sneed is, right? Yes. Highly rated golf course. Susan is also a bit of a celebrity in her own right. She's been a contributor on WLOS Television's In the Garden, URTV, WHKP Radio, and for the past 6 years, she's focused on landscape design with Meadows Farms, incorporating hardscapes, waterfalls, and beauty with plants. So, Susan, good evening. Welcome to the St. Francis of Assisi Eco Summit 2020.
Thank you for the fabulous introduction. I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for joining in, and I'm ready to just chat about these pollinators and see what we can do and create a beautiful landscape with them in it.
All right. I will turn off our camera feeds. Susan, if you want to pull up your slides,
Okay.
and we will get going.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I was going to focus a little more on the native plants in the pollinators for our area. So what is native? At one point we had Pangea, where all the continents were together, and then we separated. So a lot of things, even in Japan, are similar environment to the United States. So there are similar plants and landscapes across the world. But for us here, we have different natives that do create food. There's ecosystems where different plants and insects will feed on these plants, and the wildlife then may eat these insects and create a food chain. A lot of pollinators are needed for humans to sustain life on Earth. They create food and seeds to create more plants and clean, and the plants can clean the air. So there's many benefits of plants, and we really can't really put ourselves on top of this food chain without thinking of the bottom of the food chain in the plant life. So I had a great introduction. Thank you so much. And I'm Susan Schunk. I'm a horticulturist and landscape designer and environmental educator. I work with Meadows Farms, and I do landscape design. So I will come out to your house, do a consultation, measure, and decide the right plants for the right spot. So this is plant anatomy. So basically the pollen is the male plant DNA. So that is within the flower, the stamen part of the flower. Some people, the pollen is can not be a good thing if you have allergies. A lot of people have hay fever, but it's still part of our ecosystem. We still need to have pollen to create and have plants so that we can have cleaner air and food for the food chain. So when the pollen forms, it needs to be transferred to the stigma. So that's the top of the pistil of the plant. And in the flower, that would be in the center normally. So the stamens and anthers go around the pistil, and some plants can self-pollinate. So they would pollinate on the same flower. But normally cross-pollination is occurring. And that is through various means. So it would go from one flower to the next flower. And in the process, it could create an even healthier, more sustainable plant. If it's due to, crossbreeding, humans will crossbreed to make a different strain. And that strain could be more drought tolerant, possibly, if that's what is needed. They would take some pollen from one variety. It would have to be within the same species. So you have a genus, species, and then varieties of different plants. So like, say, for example, dogwood. So the genus is Cornus, the species is Florida, and then we have different varieties. So a different variety would be a Cherokee Princess, for example. And with that variety, we have bred out the disease that the straight species, Cornus Florida, would get, which is anthracnose. So that's the kind of beauty about cross-pollination, creating different species and, well, not species, but the varieties of plants. I am not quite sure if there's any questions right now.
Right now, Susan, we don't have any questions, but we want to remind people, if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to type them in the open question area down below the presentation. And if you're not sure where that is, feel free to type them right there in the chat.
Okay. Oops. Let me go back to here.
Oh, yep, lost your slides there.
Okay. So then there's different ways of pollination. We have the different insects. Of course, we know the honeybee is very, very busy. Probably, I think it's 3,000 plants a day, something like that, I read. Then bats are very important, mostly in tropical. We have bats around here that are more insect eating, but over in tropical areas, they do feed off fruits and really do a great job of pollinating. Birds, even animals, if they rub up against a flower and then rub up against another one, they're going to end up pollinating. Wind is a great source of pollination, especially higher trees. The wind is normally one of the better pollinators up high. And then we have people crossbreeding and creating ourselves. We can breed into those more durable plants. One that is not on here is the means of water. So if it rains, it's gonna drip down some pollen onto another surface and other plants.
Susan, we
Yes.
happen to have a question. Janet wanted to know about where the pollen is in the chart. Where's the pollen in this chart, she says.
Oh, this previous slide probably.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me see. Okay, so I don't have a pointer, but there's an arrow that says anther. If you can see that. And so that's outside of the stigma, the pistil, the style. And you can see within the center here, it goes from the anther and the filament, which is combined, is called the stamen. So that's the male part of this flower. The female part is in the center of the pistil. then you'll see the couple arrows coming down saying ovary. This is where seeds form. It's you know, it's almost like a human. You have fertilization happening. You need a male part to go, goes down the stigma, goes down the style into the ovaries, and starts forming a seed, which is like a baby to reproduce this plant. So a lot of people are confused about fruits and vegetables. The seed is the reproductive part that needs to be fertilized to recreate. What if you cut an apple in half, you can almost see the ovary there, but the fleshy part outside of those seeds is actually an enlarged ovary. So it's the area around, in this picture, you can see the little circles that could be seeds. And then the area outside of that is more of the fleshy part that gets more and more enlarged. And that's the part we eat of an apple.
So is the pollen then in the anther?
Yes, the pollen comes from the anther. It has to get up to the stigma, go down the style into the ovary.
So that's when the pollinators, by touching the anther, they get the pollen, and they are the ones who deliver it. Or a lot of
So
times,
they're accidentally getting this pollen. They're not. They're what most of the insects are wanting the nectar. So that's in the stigma and style. So they're feeding. They're putting their tongues through the stigma, getting the pollen on their legs, and going to the next plant, and it ends up touching that stigma, going down the style into the ovary. But each flower has, most flowers have both the female and the male parts on them. They'll have the pollen and the nectar area of the ovary. So it's just most plants also cross-pollinate. So that busy bee working flower to flower is cross-pollinating for us. Humans can go, get a Q-tip, touch that anther, go to the next flower, put it on that stigma, and pollinate themselves. And then some plants will self-pollinate. So they would use their own pollen in that same flower to reproduce.
wow, it sounds like a lot of work. So if we ever see Father Iggy walking around the property with a Q-tip, he's probably cross-pollinating flowers.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But the anatomy is almost, very so similar to humans. But you don't think of that in a plant, because they are, it's just a plant. It's at the bottom of the food chain. It's on the ground coming from the dirt. But I mean, if you can imagine this in human anatomy, and it kind of makes more sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you. That's very cool.
Okay. So then, so this talks about it here, the pollination, germination, penetration of the ovule, and fertilization. So this is the flowering. We went into the anatomy of the oh, you can't see where I'm pointing. You see the stamen, and it has men in it, so you can kind of associate that with the male part of the flower. So the tip of those yellow, and I'm looking at the flowers icon first. they're in yellow. So from the stamen, the anther, the tip of it has the little pollen grains containing sperm nuclei. And then once the pollen hits the stigma, down to the third flower icon on the right, then it'll go down that style, which is like a pollen tube, into the ovary and create an egg. And then fertilizes the egg, where then it becomes an embryo of a seed. And then the plant seed will germinate and produce a new plant. And then the mature plant will produce flowers. And then the cycle goes on and on and on.
The circle of life.
Yeah. And we need a couple other things. We need sun, we need soil, we need water, but this is how they recreate themselves. So the purpose of pollination, there's a lot of reasons for us to need some pollinators and plants to pollinate. So it's food for humans and animals with the nectar, all the berries that animals would forage for. But 3/4 of our food is pollinated. And not only is it from the plants, it also goes to, the cows. They need to eat grass and grains. And then, if we are meat eaters, then we can eat the cow. And then the cow can decompose, create soil, and even our waste, can create soil. It goes back to the earth to fertilize more plants. So the nectar that the birds and the bees love, and then the bees can provide some honey from plants for us also. And some people, I don't know if you all know this, but I think it's vegan or one of the vegan to the more extreme does not even eat honey because it is a byproduct of an animal life. So you see here the food chain. It's a series of organisms that depend on each other as sources of food. So at the bottom is the plants, and then we have insects, caterpillars, whatever that will eat the plants, and then something will eat the insects, whether it be fish, frogs, birds, and a snake ate the frog, and then the eagle's at the top of the food chain, so it ate the snake. So we don't have much that eats eagles as much, but humans, lions, eagles are at the top of the food chain, and plants are at the bottom, which is interesting because we really need these plants. We can't breathe without them, but they're still at the bottom. But luckily they're plentiful right now. So then another interesting fact is that humans need a variety of plants to have a variety of vitamins and minerals in our bodies to nourish our bodies. So if we just ate corn every day, we're going to lack different vitamins that we need. And then the plant variety also comes from the seeds where we can recreate. We can also make new varieties from those seeds, and even breed out disease from plants and breed in better qualities of the plant's survivability. So I was just wanting to let you all know about the native fruits that we have in Northern Virginia and this area. So blueberries are native. There are different cultivated varieties, but for the most part, they are native. And it takes a honeybee 3 times to pollinate a blueberry. I don't know if you've seen their flowers. They're kind of a cup, like a hat kind of shaped flower. So I don't know how the honeybees get in there. It's a small opening, but they work for it. I guess the nectar's good enough to where they try hard enough to get those berries to get fertilized and cross-pollinate. Raspberries are native, blackberries, elderberry. Is anybody out there taking elderberry during this virus time? It's a very good immune booster. I'm taking it. And that you'll find elderberries growing a lot around water. So they're blooming right now. They have like a white, creamy flower. And they can get pretty tall. I have some over at my other property, and they're 6 foot, 7 foot tall right now. I'm really excited that they're doing well. Serviceberry, that's more like a tree, kind of a shrubby tree that has a small edible berry. It's a native. Chokecherry, they like the water also. And pawpaws. Is anybody familiar with pawpaws? They're kind of a custard-like fruit. So it's not really a berry, but it's native and in the woodlands, and they're usually like a grouping of them. When you see one, there's probably going to be a few more around.
Susan, these are all edible berries, every single one on the list?
Yeah, all edible, all native, all needing pollination. So, but basically anything that flowers is going to have pollen. So, but what's our more useful plants? What are we looking to create ourselves? What do we want in our yards so that it's functional? You don't want sneezeweed probably, or or any of those, allergen producing ones. So there's different shapes of pollen too. That's what, some of them look like they have barbs on them. And I think that's where people get irritated and they latch on and itchy eyes and
Carol wants us to know, Susan, that there actually are 2 pawpaw trees in the garden at St. Thomas of Becket Church.
Oh, very good. They're a special plant. They're really, I don't know, a little magical whenever I come across one. They like to be around water too, and they're an understory type of plant. But it's a tree. It's considered a tree, and they do have different varieties now. So there are a little bit more hardy varieties for you to grow in your landscape. And one good variety of that is called Taylor. So, and
Are these also found at a local garden center, all of these?
they have a variety of elderberry that is more decorative. It's got a dark leaf. The native one in the wild is a green leaf. The one in the nurseries has a pink flower also. And it's called Black Beauty. But yes, blackberries. Yeah, there's thornless blackberries now that they've bred. Serviceberry, chokecherry. Yeah, you can find all those in the nursery. Even, you know, we have retail nurseries all over Northern Virginia, we're into Maryland, and we have the great big greenhouse also down in Richmond. So if you just Google Meadows Farms, and you can find, you know, one of us that's pretty close to you. I don't know about Connecticut; they're mostly in and not in Clemson either. Sorry, go Tigers. And then there's gooseberry. There's other berries too that I don't have all listed. But the different varieties, right now I have 3 different types of blueberries growing. You can get an early crop, a mid-season crop, and a late crop. So you can kind of stagger the harvest time and have berries longer. One of the best raspberry varieties out there that I don't know, you know, all of them right now, but that is really hardy. It's called Heritage. The blackberries that are thornless are like Indian names like Navajo, Arapaho, um, and then chokecherry pawpaw. Yep.
We have a few questions now coming in for you, Susan. Robert wants to know, are strawberries not native to the Northern Virginia area?
You know, I was questioning that, and I Googled it, and it said it is native. But so then there's different varieties. You know, you can see those little. So that's a good. I might have to get back with you on a little bit more information with that, but I think this has probably been a breeding issue with the type of big strawberries. But
Okay.
it does say that it is native. And strawberries are interesting because, like my flower anatomy, it's called an aggregate. So it produces seeds on the outside of the ovary, if you can see that. So it's pretty interesting.
Elena wants to know, are there variations in varieties that are supposed to be hardier? Are they considered native then?
Yes, that's a good question too. To me, you know, with how I started with saying Pangea is, you know, we were all one at one point. So what is native? But basically, when you crossbreed, it puts a variety on there, and I don't think it's a variety of a native. So it's kind of like a technical term on the scientific name. So I don't think it's not the straight species that came first. So I would say it's not so native.
Gotcha. Mike wanted to share that Earth Sangha near Lee High School in Springfield has all native plants for Fairfax County. He believes you can find them there.
Which
That's,
find
um,
the fruits.
it sounds like some of the plants you've been mentioning, that's what I believe he's referring to.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, and some people will also practice organic measures without the pesticides and all that. And that's better for pollinators through their nurseries. So if you're going that route, which is important too, then you might want to Google some places that have organic fruits. And to be organic, they would start, I mean, it starts 7 years in the soil of no pesticides at the farms. No pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers, which is man-made, fish emulsion, some different natural fertilizers are allowed. And a lot of times I like to say this. It sounds funny, but when plants are on fertilizers, especially synthetic fertilizers like Miracle Grow, it's like they're pumped up on drugs. So when you take that away from them, they kind of go into a shock and they have to readjust, and they're not going to look so well unless they keep getting that dose. So having organic plants in the beginning who are already just hardy enough and just get those nutrients that are going to feed the plant, and then in turn go those good nutrients go into the fruit that they're going to bear that is natural, and then you're going to consume that naturally, organically. It's going to have a lot more vitamins and minerals for you.
Susan, Father Iggy here at St. Francis Parish has talked about starting a pollinator garden here. And we were wondering, is there certain flowers you'd recommend to plant? What would be the best flowers, do you think, if you were starting off a pollinator garden in this area?
Um, are you doing this for mostly for insects?
I think so. I think the talk was maybe to attract pollinators to the area.
To attract like the honeybees and the butterflies.
Butterflies and yes.
Okay, let me go to my next slide here. Because you don't necessarily have to just go with natives. But this is a nice look, and it's pretty. It's going to provide a lot of nectar, and you also want to have host plants, which we'll get into for those pollinators. So for the larva, all the stages, and we'll get into that. But some native perennials here. We have purple coneflower in the front. And then in the back is a monarda, or they call that bee balm. So high nectar for bees, butterflies, moths. Then you'll see so I have monarda, purple coneflower. These you'll see on the sides of roads. And they look like weed, and they have weed in their name, but very beneficial to pollinators. And I think they still look pretty too. But there's ironweed, joe pye weed, milkweed is a good host for the monarch butterflies. There's mountain mint, butterfly weed. So I don't know. I don't have all the pictures up for those, but maybe you can kind of Google these. And so these are perennials. Perennials are plants that come back every year on their own. Annuals are what you need to plant yearly yourself. So,
Susan, oh, sorry to interrupt, Susan, but I'm at note. These flowers you just mentioned, Brother Iggy wanted to know, are they available as plants, or can you get them also as seeds in this area, the local area?
Yeah, I think anything you can get as seeds. The really common purple coneflower to get at nurseries, and then there's so many different varieties. So the native one has a very long, I think it's Pallida is the species. It has a long petal, where you see these are kind of short, and you can see the cone forming. But so that's another interesting thing. It's just like they kind of breed them to look better, more aesthetically pleasing, and then the hardiness. But monarda isn't as common, but you can find that at the nurseries. Ironweed, I don't see that much at the nursery. Joe pye weed is now at nurseries, because I think people are wanting natives more. They're more aware, and for pollinators. So there's another one. Joe pye weed can get very tall, can get 5 foot, 6 foot. It has a huge purple fuzzy flower, and then it starts, bending over. So they've bred one that's called Little Joe. So you can get a dwarf size a Joe Pye weed, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and then butterfly weed is the orange flower. The genus is Asclepias, but that one is a great host. I think it's a host plant and for nectar, so a good feeder.
Carol had a question about fish emulsion. She
Yes.
wants to know how old can you let fish emulsion get before you have to get rid of it? She has some she's never used, and it's about 5 years old, she thinks.
Oh, I think that yeah, it has some kind of a timeline. It sounds like that might be too old. Because some of those organic fertilizers you're supposed to refrigerate, keep cooler too. I would think it would be expired. I'm not positive. Um, but I do want to tell you also fertilizers, there's usually you see three numbers on the fertilizer. So say it's like fish emulsion, I think that's like 00. It's really low. It's like 003 or something like that. So the first number is N for nitrogen. The middle number is NP, P for phosphorus. And the last number is K for potassium. So nitrogen helps green the leaves. Then the phosphorus I use for root stimulation. And then the potassium is good for flower production, flower and fruit. So you want to use those numbers for what you're growing. Always, when you are first planting, you want to concentrate on root growth. And I like to tell people, and they get a kick out of this, is the first year you plant, they sleep. The second year they creep, and the third year they leap. So you don't want to fertilize those tender new roots that are coming out, because you could burn them if you have, too high of a dose of fertilizer. So you kind of want to wait till that third year to start really pushing some new top growth. And then you can start, using some of that fertilizer in doing that.
We have a couple more questions coming in for you, Susan. Madeline wants to know what varieties of flowers are best to attract pollinating birds like hummingbirds.
Well, hummingbirds, a lot of these, the hummingbirds like also. And hummingbirds like bright colors. They're attracted to the red, when we do the sugar water. So anything with bright colors, and even the Monarda. The Monarda in this picture is in the back, that pink color, the pretty tall one. Another name for that is bergamot. And then another name is bee balm. But that bee balm can come in red. There's multiple varieties and colors of Monarda. The butterfly weed is a bright orange, and that would be helpful for the hummingbirds. A lot of annuals, hummingbirds love salvias or red salvias. So I would say, the bright colors and high nectar so that they can get their beak in there and, be able to reach the nectar.
Okay, and Jim had a question for perennials that you show. What are their sun needs?
Yeah, most of this picture is in full sun, so they can tolerate full sun. And most of these can also take part sun. So I like to tell people that that for more flowers, for the full bloom feel, you're going to want full sun. If you start giving some shade, they're not going to bloom as profusely, but they're still going to bloom. You're still going to be okay if you have part sun. So I would still try these perennials if you have, a shady situation.
Ed wanted to share a website. He said there's a good guide for native flowers. It's www.plantnovanatives.org, in case
Thank
anybody's
you.
interested.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, and that's our last question we have for the moment.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide. Okay, so there's some native vines also if you want to incorporate some of these into your landscape. The first, I kind of have these out of order, but the first yellow leaf, and it's an evergreen, I'm sorry, yellow flower, but it's an evergreen leaf. It's called Carolina jessamine. You'll see it as Carolina jasmine, but the correct name is jessamine. And then we have honeysuckles. There's native honeysuckles. There's also Japanese, and I think Japanese or Chinese honeysuckle also, but some pretty colors with the honeysuckles, and what a high nectar plant there, and hummingbirds would love that too. We do have a native wisteria. So that's the purple flower down here. You want to stay away from the Japanese or Chinese wisteria. It just gets way out of control. You turn your back and then it's climbing in your house. So this is a much less aggressive variety. So you want to see the genus is wisteria. The species is frutescens. And the variety the variety that's in the nurseries is called Amethyst Falls. So please stay away from the Chinese or Japanese wisteria and go with our natives on that one. And the last one is down here on the right. Not a lot of people know these vines, so that's why I kind of wanted to put these in here as natives also. This is a cross vine. It's also evergreen. It's got a tubular, flower, and there's a great variety called Tangerine Beauty. So if you're interested in vines, these are great suggestions for that. Okay, then now we're getting into some native trees and shrubs. This isn't our whole list, but we have the maples. They're great for pollinators, and they're one of the they're up high, so it's going to be birds, insects that can reach those heights. Dogwoods, redbuds. This berry up here on the right corner is a hawthorn, which is also medicinal. So a lot of these plants, not only are they food, not only do they help us with air quality, they're also help us medicinally. And we have down here on the left bottom is Itea, has a great red fall foliage and a pretty long white flower. And then on the bottom right is St. John's wort. Is anybody familiar with that as an herbal remedy? It helps keep you calm. So beautiful plant. It has a great fall color too that isn't in this picture, but you can see the berries here. So then there's clethra. You'll see tons of butterflies loving this clethra. And there's so many different species of viburnum, also cultivated varieties, but it's amazing how diverse this genus is. So 35% human food needs pollinated. That includes coffee and chocolate. Who can't live without their coffee and chocolate?
All right. Well, I'm putting in a pollinator garden right away.
Yeah. And healing herbs, keeping us alive, keeping us safe, giving us nutrition, giving us vitamins, minerals, helping us, chocolate is supposed to be at some kind of a dose. It's a what does it do? It does something like calming. And coffee is kind of a stimulant. We need to wake up and then calm down. And who knew plants did all this for us? So this is Meadows Farms. This is our logo, planting a little happiness. So I'm really glad. I love my job. I love to be able to beautify people's yards, make them feel better, and I'm glad I'm relevant in these times. And if people are at home, they're just, looking at their yard, and I'm still able to come and help um, with that and help plant a little happiness and stop the doom and gloom with blooms. And so if we die, we're taking we're taking you with us. So that's the honeybee there. And then Albert Einstein said this: if the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, man would have no more than 4 years to live. I'm not positive that's true, but with the food chain, with the air quality, with the all the food that we do rely on, um, it could be possible. I also, so when you're thinking about your pollinator garden, to help your pollinator garden, help pollinators get attracted to your space, you want to stagger your bloom times. So don't just have everything blooming in summer. We need to feed these pollinators in the spring, throughout the summer, throughout the fall. There are some plants that bees do kind of hibernate in the winter, and a lot of beekeepers will supplement their food intake by giving them pollen. But there are some winter blooming plants as well. They also need some shelter. They need water. Some shade in there is good, not just full sun. They need to cool off and get into some shade. And then we need some plants for the larvae to feed on, and try not to use pesticides. Pesticides are a chemical normally that is to deter insects or kill them. So just, environmentally pollinator friendly practices. You are going to have other insects that want to come in there that aren't what we want to have, that are chewing on your leaves, that sucking out your the chlorophyll. You'll see those. So the best practice is to watch them. You've got to just do your monitoring. As soon as you start seeing a problem, you mechanically pick the caterpillar off, or and the last resort is pesticides. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. And this was new to me. I can't see you. I'm just talking to my laptop here, but I'm very pleased to be able to provide this information for you, because it is a very important topic, and I'm glad you're interested. The more people that are interested, the better the outcome is going to be in the long run.
Hey, Susan, we have a couple more questions that have just popped up. Maybe if you could take a few last minute more.
Of course.
We have Jim asking about, is pesticide soap environmentally friendly in your opinion?
There's horticultural oil, and then there is insecticidal soap, and those are considered organic. So there's some practices to follow with those. Re-entry times, or temperatures. I think the horticultural oil, if it's too high a temperature, it will burn your plants. So you've just got to follow the instructions on those. But there's some more organic practices with those.
Elena wanted to say, please point out flowers, trees that are invasive when most people think they're pollinator friendly. Do you have any information on that?
To me, anything that flowers is a pollinator because they're going to have pollen. Um, so yes, invasive trees and shrubs, and then they're just going to keep on reproducing. So it can be an issue. It's still food for these insects and birds.
She was referring to something like a Bradford pear, a butterfly bush, she says, etc.
Okay, so a lot of times, okay, the butterfly bush spreads. Some birds will eat the seeds, like well, it's native, but like a cedar tree. You'll see those planted like along a fence line because a bird will go eat the cedar berries, sit on the fence, and poop and plant that seed. So there's there's always that, even deer, are eating certain plants and fertilizing them and pooping them and planting them. But the seeds, other than animals, they can drop by wind and water and germinate. So again, there's other varieties that they kind of breed that out of, that they don't become so invasive. So it's just having people become aware of what is invasive and what not to plant, because nurseries is retail, and if somebody wants to buy a privet, if then it's hard to say, okay, the nurseries are going to make money on that plant. Are they just going to stop selling invasive species? So I think it has to become a standard of the whole trade to not provide invasive species. But even as, thank goodness right now the environment is clearing up. We've got better air quality right now. We've got better populations of natural environments and insects and animals and everything. But when the environment does become toxic, guess what comes? It just seems like everything thrives that's invasive, and they take over because they're drought tolerant. They can take the heat, they can take the dry, and they thrive in those situations. And then they're just kind of going to take over. So, yeah, it's just going to be a a kind of a standard practice, throughout the industry to help out with these issues, because it's really hard to get rid of invasives once they've taken over. You see kudzu all around, going down South Carolina, and it takes away from the value of your property. I mean, they just smother houses and landscapes. So, but
Elena and Mary wanted to recommend a book if you're interested in natives. It's called Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Ptolemy.
oh, thank you. But you know what? Kudzu has a lot of nectar, and there's kudzu jelly that's really good too. Bringing nature home, Douglas, tell me.
All right, that looks like all the questions we have. I think we've probably gone, Brandon, what do you think? A little over an hour now?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit over an hour. Now, I think, Susan, you've given us a lot of tips tonight. This replay will be available. It sounds like it is something that if people do a little bit of their own research, they actually can come up with a decent little pollinator garden on their own.
Yeah, you should. I am more proud of the nursery industry in providing more natives and pollinators. And we're really doing a full circle here, where it used to be just, the landscape plants, just cookie cutter kind of materials, where now it's more diverse and more, environmentally friendly.
Excellent. Well, Scott, I think that's all the questions we've got right now.
I think so. A lot of people are saying thank you and they appreciate the information.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think that's a good time to wrap things up then. Susan, thank you again so much for joining us this evening to talk about what I think is a very important and extremely fascinating topic.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all, and I appreciate you having me on board.
Yes, you're welcome. Glad you were here. Now, how to plant your pollinator garden. This is the third webinar of our first ever St. Francis of Assisi Eco Summit. For everyone watching, thank you so much for attending, especially those of you who have come out every night so far. It really means a lot to the team who spent so much time putting this summit together. As I've mentioned in previous webinars, you should be receiving an email with a link to the replay. So if you took notes tonight, that's great. If you want to watch it again, if you didn't jot everything down, you'll get a link to the replay of the webinar. However, within the next week or so, I'll be editing the webinar because the replay link is actually only available if you've registered for the webinar. So you won't be able to share it with anyone. But I'll be editing this down. All the webinar recordings will be made available. We'll be uploading those to YouTube. Once that happens, the Care for Creation Committee will be sending you information on where to find those videos so that you can share the link to the recordings with any family or friends who might be interested in what we've discussed here tonight or any other time during this summit. One final thing, please note that by registering for the webinar, you were automatically added to our St. Francis of Assisi Care for Creation email list. Trust me, we won't bombard you with email, and we'll try to make everything we send valuable and actionable. But if you really don't want to receive email from us, there is an unsubscribe link in the footer of every email we send to that list. Just click the link. You'll be unsubscribed and the emails will stop, I promise. So thanks again for attending, and don't miss tomorrow night's webinar is electric cars are great for you and for the climate. All you wanted to know about EVs and more. Ron Coltenbaugh, who kicked off our summit on Monday night, he will be back sharing the impacts of climate change and some possible, or he was talking about before, I'm sorry, about the impacts of climate change and some of the possible solutions. And he's going to be back to talk to us about one of his favorite solutions, which is electric vehicles. And Ron did talk a little bit about that Monday night, and you can tell it's a topic he is very passionate about. Believe me, if you haven't checked out electric vehicles lately, it's time to take another look. They've come a long way since the Prius of 20 years ago. So drop by tomorrow night at 7 p.m. to learn more about current options that are right for you and right for the environment. With that, I'll bring this webinar to a close. I have been Brandon Jubar, your host this evening. One more shout out to Susan Schunk for speaking to us tonight. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Yep, Susan's contact information is on the screen right now, and we will include that when we send it out later. You can learn more about the numerous locations Meadow Farms has around Virginia and Maryland by visiting meadowsfarms.com. That's Meadows with an S, plural, meadowsfarms.com. And actually, if you live somewhere along the I-95 corridor, between like Fredericksburg and up into Alexandria, I think, and you'd like to work directly with Susan on your next major landscaping project, or if you just like to talk to her and get her help with putting in a pollinator garden, you can absolutely reach out to her directly. Use the contact information that's on the screen right now, or we'll be sending that out in emails coming up in the next week or so. Thank you all again for spending time with us this evening. And until tomorrow night, Scott and I bid you adieu. Goodbye, Scott. I'll talk to you later.
All right, Brandon. Have a good night, everybody.
Susan, thanks again. God bless, and thank you for caring for our common home. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.